So welcome, everyone. We're delighted to have you with us this evening. I think we have a marvelous program in store for you. We have a lot going on here in Minneapolis tonight, as Katie has said, but it's not going to have any decisions, any results for a while yet, in all likelihood. So let's have some fun together tonight before we get into those newsworthy items. Let's start by simply finding out what people are seeing out there. You can use chat to let us know what you're seeing, or you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you so you can report. I've had some good luck at Wood Lake in the last few days. I think the American white pelican has left now. There were 3 weeks ago, there were about 100 of them on Wood Lake, but now I think the last one has flown off. There still are, however, widgeon and gadwall and lots of other waterfowl. So, hawks are fairly commonly found there. Also the bass ponds and the Mississippi, and the Minnesota river down by the Old Cedar Avenue Bridge has got pintails and other things. Yes. Someone is reporting lots of dark-eyed juncos. They've arrived in our yard as well. It's nice to have them back, and that delightful little twitter, the chit sound that they sing. Keep in touch with each other. What else are you seeing? What do you want to report? I saw a wave actually of fox sparrows come through the Blaine Wetland Sanctuary last Saturday, I think. It was nice to see them. Anyone else have sightings to report? Share what you're seeing. Let us know. Cedar waxwings, yes. Actually, they've been active on the berry-bearing trees in our area. So mountain ash and other berry trees have had lots of cedar waxwings. The Bohemian waxwings are appearing on the North Shore, and there have been some sightings of snow buntings and horned larks coming through up there. What else? Pileated woodpeckers are moving around. I think that's from Katie. This is a time of year when they identify their territory for the winter, their feeding routes for the winter. Lots of white-breasted nuthatches caching seeds.
It's on my way home today from a meeting that I had in South Minneapolis. As I was crossing the 35W bridge, a fully mature adult bald eagle was going up over the bridge, but it looked like maybe 5 feet above the cars, and had a very large stick, some branches, perhaps some nesting material, and was having a bit of trouble getting that lift. I had a moment where I was a little bit worried, but it was pretty exciting to see, and definitely an indicator of the changing of the seasons.
Elegant bird, elegant bird. So I think I don't see other reports. Katie, let's move into the program. We've got such a good program to share. Let's just move into that. Well, actually, before we do that, let me also say there's actually a lot going on in the chapter, but I don't want to review all that now. What I'd prefer is to simply recommend that people go to our website or stay in touch with our Facebook page, because there's lots of good stuff to pay attention to, opportunities for you to be involved. So check out our website. Katie, let's do the program.
Thank you. Yeah, I do want to make a special little spot that will actually, in the chat function, will drop either myself or Irene, our co-lead for the outreach and education team. We will put an email down if you're interested in joining us Later this week, we'll have a virtual meeting for our outreach and education team, and we're planning some activities to do some trash birding later this month. And trash birding, for those of you that aren't familiar, it is going out and picking up trash while we are birding. So we participate in community science, and we do make an eBird list. And part of our trash cleanup, we have an area in North Minneapolis. Shingle Creek runs through a park. It's called Weber Park in North Minneapolis, and Shingle Creek runs through that and empties right into the Mississippi River. So it's a really great area that we've seen a nice number of species of birds that are there even throughout the winter months. And we could make some really big impacts with cleaning up not only trash and things that would impact surface water quality and present a hazard to birds and other wildlife, but we're also adopting drains under the name of the Audubon Chapter of Minneapolis. And we'll have some fun opportunities to suggest names for the drains that we are adopting. For those of us that are outside of Minnesota, here in Minnesota, we're very lucky, we're one of just a small handful of states in the United States here that have an adopt a drain program. And this is something that anyone can do. You don't have to live right next to the drain. It can be one near a favorite park that you have, or near your school, or wherever. It could be anywhere within the area that you live in. So something that you can go to at least maybe once a month and clean up the leaves and other things out of there. So we know that even though leaves and other things like grass clippings are natural materials, we know that those do impact surface water quality. And by cleaning those up and having them in areas where they can compost and give those excess nutrients to a place where they belong, so much better for everybody, for birds and for people. So if you're interested in joining us, check at the end of the program. We'll drop an email into the chat that you can reach out to if you'd like to get the Zoom link information for that meeting, or if you just like to learn about some of the activities that we have coming up and want to make sure that you are on that list. All right, so I will ask Irene to join us to turn on her camera. There she is. And go ahead and turn your mic on as well. We'll make sure everything works just fine.
All right.
Okay, great. So for some of you may know Irene and may have worked with her in the past, whether you know her through the chapter or through different organizations and efforts here in Minnesota. But we've been very lucky to have Irene as a board member of the Audubon Chapter of Minneapolis. And as I mentioned earlier, she is also the co-leader of our outreach and education team with the chapter. Irene is originally from Spain, and she actually spent 5 years working at the Raptor Center at the University of Minnesota as a veterinarian specializing in raptors, which is where I was lucky enough to meet her. She holds a master's in public health and a PhD in veterinary epidemiology from the University of Minnesota. And her research involves the use of eco-epidemiological approaches to assessing risk to wildlife and the environment. And that ties directly into the program that she's going to be sharing with us tonight. We were so excited to have her bring this to you all. She does a really excellent job of taking the what can sometimes be a very dry component in research, and being able to take that information, take the guts of the research and the data, and turn it into a story that everyone, I think, can connect to. And when we're thinking about kind of the focus for tonight, where the story takes us to Galápagos, this is a place on Earth where I think a lot of people, no matter where you live, have had really strong feelings about and very passionate about the conservation stories that take place there. And we want to see the living things there thrive, to really do well and continue to survive. So thank you so much, Irene, for joining us this evening and sharing your work through storytelling. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera and let you take it away.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that very nice introduction, Katie. I hope I do justice to what you just said. And it's really an honor to be the presenter tonight for Audubon Chapter of Minneapolis, where I have the pleasure to be board member and volunteer as well. So as Katie said, I will be talking about Galapagos, but my goal is that what you learn today can be applied to any conservation problem that is closer to home, as you will see. And so I want you to think about that as I go through the story, because it's not just Galapagos and an isolated story there, but this can be applied to anywhere. So first of all, just as a disclaimer, I have been to Galapagos only once, and that was actually connected to a different project, not this one. And so this is to say that most of the pictures I will show are not mine. Some of them are mine, but most of them are from colleagues and some from the internet. So just I will put it out there. And I just wanted to start off by asking you about decisions, because today we're going to be talking a lot about decisions, uncertainty, and how to make decisions actually in conservation. So I want you to think for a few seconds, how many decisions did you make today? Today, or even from the last few days, from the moment you wake up until you go to bed. So just think about it for a few seconds. And I don't need you to tell me how many, but if you think about it, like from the moment you wake up, you are start to make decisions about everything pretty much throughout the day. So you have to think about what clothes to wear, what you're gonna eat for breakfast, what park are you gonna go birding, and if you were gonna come to this program or not. I mean, there are so many decisions to make throughout the day. And so sometimes these decisions are not just what you're gonna eat, but they are more like life-changing, or these decisions can affect other people and even groups of people. And so we are making constantly decisions on every aspect of our lives. And yeah, some of them are really tough. And as you will see today, in conservation, we face also this constant decision-making that are not easy. When we are trying to make a decision, how do we do that? So we try to gather as much data and as much information as we can to make the best decision or feel good about a decision and not look back. That's one of the things that are right about decisions. So once you make it, don't look back, otherwise it's gonna be bad situation for your head. So this is one of the cases where we try to gather that information, but not all the time. And in fact, most of the times we don't have all the information we want to make that decision. And that's what we call uncertainty, that lack of information that we really wish we had to make that decision. So again, as you will see in conservation, this is like a really common thing, especially in wildlife, when we are looking at wildlife problems, where threats, where we wish we had a lot of information to make that decision, but we don't. And so you will see these words throughout today's presentation, and I hope it will make sense within the story. So in terms of uncertainty, the last couple of years, we have had the best examples, I will say, in our lives of uncertainty. And this is related to the COVID-19 pandemic. So at the beginning, I'm sure you remember perfectly well, when the pandemic started in February or March 2020, we didn't have a clue about what SARS-CoV-2 was, how it was transmitted, how we will get infected, and all of these things, right? We still don't know a lot, but when we started, it was just nothing. And so at the beginning, at least I did this, I would disinfect every piece of grocery that will come in the house, every piece of mail. We had no idea how it would get transmitted. So what we were doing, we were being cautious. So when we don't have information, and this is very common in public health world, like in this case, COVID, we follow what is called the precautionary principle. So in those cases, without information, we cannot err on the side of caution. Now, fortunately, due to science and all of the progress that we have made in the last couple of years, we have effective vaccines, and we have different ways to protect ourselves and to better understand the transmission of this virus. And so you can see how from nothing to all of this knowledge that we have now, we can make decisions about our daily lives just with that information. Still, again, we don't know everything by any means about COVID-19, and we're still learning, and we will improve our management and our decisions based on that. So this, I thought it was a good example to transition into wildlife. So when we talk about wildlife conservation and making decisions in wildlife, one of the problems is that usually funding is not really there. So it's hard to make a lot of progress that fast to make decisions as compared to public health or other areas where there is usually more funding to advance the research. But again, as I said in the beginning, even though I'm going to talk about Galapagos, I want you to think about everything I say applied back home, applied to any conservation issue that you might be facing, that you might be dealing with, or that you are aware of, and apply that approach that I'm going to show you back to those problems. All right, so as I said, we're going to talk about Galapagos. And the story today, I hope it will make sense, but I think it won't take a long time. So we will have time for questions at the end to clarify anything that it didn't come across clear. So let's take a trip to Galapagos. I think it's pretty good time of the year to do that now that it's starting to get cold here. So we're gonna go to this archipelago that is off the coast of Ecuador in the Pacific Ocean. And it's actually about 700 miles off the coast of Ecuador. It belongs, the archipelago, to Ecuador, the country. And these are like many different type of islands in different sizes. There are like a few that are bigger, as you can see in the picture, but there are like actually very like tiny ones that can be like identified as big rocks, but they are still kind of like small islands. And the main features of these islands is that they are volcanic in origin. And the other important feature about these islands, apart from being very remote, is that they are surrounded by different kind of oceanic currents. And these are very important currents to help with the diversity of the ocean, the proliferation and the abundance of food for seabirds and other wildlife in the islands. Some of these currents maybe you have heard or know about, like the Humboldt current from the Antarctica, the Panama flow that it goes also through these islands, and then the Cromwell current are the three main ones that affect the dynamics of these islands. And so with many threats to obviously climate change and other things that might affect these dynamics. Also, of course, the Galapagos Islands are known because of the work in the theory of evolution by Darwin. And these are an image, well, this is an image of Darwin when he was young. And then these are the Darwin finches that are very famous in his theory of evolution. Of course, the Galapagos have different endemic species that are, we all have seen probably in documentaries or have been there, or, we have read about it. So the marine iguanas, of course, the giant tortoise, these are like iconic for the Galapagos. But because we are bird lovers here, we're going to be talking about birds. And so the Galapagos Islands have also lots of endemic species, and I'm just going to talk about land bird species. So just about that group of birds. And these are just a few examples of the variety of endemisms that the islands have. And that's the key feature of the Galapagos. It's not like the biodiversity is so big, but it's more about the endemism richness that the islands have. And so these are some of the examples that I'm talking about, like the Galapagos hawk, the Galapagos martin, the Galapagos dove, and the Galapagos mockingbird. So you can see all of these birds are some beautiful examples of endemisms. When we look at finches, and collectively they are known as the Darwin finches, there are about 17 species of Darwin finches, and these are just some of the examples of that list. And so again, there is endemisms for the islands, and even within each island, there are going to be species that are specific to that island. So that's very unique and very beautiful creatures. So the problem, like as we face in many parts of the world, is that the Galapagos Islands are also threatened by different problems. So one of them is pollution, especially marine pollution. We have climate change, as I mentioned earlier. Also, there is human development and human population increase. So the islands are not that they have a lot of population, but in the last few years, the population have increased, and also the development within the islands have expanded. Another threat is the habitat destruction. So here is a picture of, these are a type of forest that are very specific and endemic to the Galapagos Islands. They are called Scalesia forest, and they are actually, I think, from the same family as daisies and marigolds, I believe. And on the picture on the left, you see a map, and this is just showing like historical range for this forest, showing in red. And on the picture below, and this is from a publication, they are showing again in red where the main remnants of this big forest are in one of the islands. So as you can see, the habitat has decreased dramatically. And this is mainly due to agriculture expansion, livestock, and human development. And then, of course, one of the biggest threats for any island, and the Galapagos are not unique in this case, but it's a big, big problem, is the invasive species. So invasive species can go from feral cats, and this is a picture with a cat with an iguana, a marine iguana on his mouth. And then we have rodents that have caused many, many problems. And there is a big story about rodent eradication in islands that's a big deal and a story on its own. But today we're going to talk about a very different type of invasive species, but it's still a huge problem, even though it's a very tiny creature. And it's called the avian vampire fly. So perhaps just by that name, you could imagine that it could be something like this. And so just if you think about that name, and that's the name in Spanish that they gave in Galapagos. But it doesn't look quite like that, but it looks kind of like this. So this is Philornis downsi. It's an invasive parasitic fly, and it's the size of a fly. So it's not that big as you can see in the screen, thankfully, but it still does a lot of damage to birds, as you will see. So this fly originally is native, or his range at least is known to be native to Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, and then to these places where there are numbers in South America. However, this is just where it's being reported, where people have been doing surveillance for it or looking for it. That doesn't mean it's not in other places in South America, but that's where it's been found. And in the Galapagos Islands, it's not native, it was introduced. It was introduced first, at least the first records are back to the 1960s. That's when it was first reported, like going back in time, like looking at when it was first introduced. And it was first found in a bird nest in the late 90s. And it was found in a nest of a woodpecker finch, depicted here in this picture. This fly, unfortunately, is, as I said, invasive, parasitic, and now it has expanded pretty much to all the islands, at least the main islands in Galapagos. There are only like 2 or 3 islands where the fly has not been reported yet, but probably will in the future if things continue as they are. Briefly, the life cycle of this fly starts with the adults. Let me just put the pointer here so I can show you. So it starts with the adults laying eggs on the base of bird nest. Especially affected are finches, and so you will see in a second. So it lays the eggs on the base of the nest. Then after a few hours, like 24, 48 hours, the first stage of larvae come out. And these larvae start feeding on the nestlings. So they start feeding on they are getting into the nares, into the ear cavity. And so that's what they do in the first stage. And I can see now how this program fits really well with post-Halloween fear here, because this is very scary. And then these larvae in the next stage, so the third stage of the larvae, actually feed into the tissues and the blood of the nestlings. And so in this not so pleasant picture for dinner time, you can see how the larvae is in the tissues and feeding on the poor baby bird. So then after that, the larvae go through like what is called the pupae kind of stage. And then after a few days, it comes out as an adult again. This whole cycle takes about 15 to 20 days. And as you can see, it can be very damaging for the birds. In fact, here we can see some of the damage that the larvae, which is the main problem, the adults feed mostly on plants. The larvae are the problem. So you can see here how the same picture as before, and how these are the openings on the above the beak where the birds breathe. So this is connected to the respiratory system. And this is very enlarged compared to a normal nair, that's called nair. So the hole is very enlarged in this bird here due to the impact of the larvae. And here you can see as well the same problem and all the injuries that this bird has caused by the larvae. Most of the time, as you can imagine, due to this infestation that is so big, these nestlings, these chicks do not usually survive when they have been affected like that. They become anemic, debilitated, and they end up dying. So they often do not make it to become adults. But when they do, sometimes if they have kind of gone over the phase and they have survived, they have actually reported some adults with problems, consequences from the infestation, like this one that has like a cross bill. And so when that happens, adults cannot feed themselves either, and then usually they don't do well, they end up dying too. So this is not just a problem at the individual level or at a nest level, it actually is a problem at the population level. 14 out of 28 endemic small terrestrial bird species in Galapagos are threatened. And this is being listed by the IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature. 3 of these 14 species, or well, actually 2 of them are critically endangered. And these are the mangrove finch here on the left. The median tree finch is also critically endangered. And then we have others that are also in decreasing trends, like the little vermilion flycatcher, this beautiful red bird here. And they are like in a vulnerable status. And just to say how damaging this fly is the #1 threat right now for these bird species. So huge problem in Galapagos. So as you can imagine, there needs to be solutions to solve this problem of the Philornis downsi, this fly. When you are making decisions in conservation, there are a range of possible solutions, and one of them is always going to be on the table, which is do nothing. And doing nothing here obviously will be a problem because birds will basically disappear slowly. So the Galapagos managers and field biologists are coming up with different types of solutions for a long-term sustainable control of Philornis downsi. But these are solutions that take time to research, to develop. And some of these long-term solutions are biological control. So this means that they are studying some wasps that are actually in their native territory for the fly. These wasps are predators. So the fly are they actually cause problems to the fly. And so they are studying this as a potential biological control. And they are doing all of these other techniques, as well as looking at biochemical control. So there is a tree in some of the islands, the guayabillo is called, that is supposed to have like a repellent insecticide, like a natural repellent against the fly. So they are also testing that natural insecticide against Philornis. But again, this takes time and research, and they have to do well to make it sustainable. So in the short term, there is an urgent need to control this fly so that these bird populations still remain. One of them has been captive breeding of the mangrove finches, which are here to a couple of the babies in the picture. So what they have done with mangrove finches is that they have brought into captivity the nestlings, the little babies, when they are actually, I think from the egg stage, they bring them into captivity, they raise them in captivity until they have gone over the phase in which the fly is more aggressive towards the nestlings. And so they try to avoid having these very critically endangered species out in the nest in the mangrove areas, which are very remote, and it's very hard to control the nest. So they try to breed them in captivity and then bring them back when they are almost like fledgling stage. Another thing that they have done is that they have set up traps for flies for the adults, and you can see that in the picture here with those kind of yellow buckets. And the third thing that they have been doing is to apply insecticides. And that's where also the story and the project, how I got involved. So for insecticides, they have been using mostly one that is called Permethrin. So Permethrin is a broad spectrum insecticide that works against the adults and the larvae of insects, of some of the insects, and it affects their nervous system. So, and that's why they end up not being able to move, they end up dying, talking about the insects. And so what they have been doing that has been very effective is that they inject the base of the nest of the finches with permethrin. And actually what they have observed over time with their field trials is that the larvae of the fly decreases in numbers, and also the baby birds have a much better rate of survival with applying this permethrin. And however, there are challenges with this approach. One of them is that the nests of most of these birds are really high up in the canopy. Some of them are like up to 25 meters. And also the nest of finches, you can imagine, they are super small. So in order to inject something precisely and to all the nests that you want to tackle, it's quite the endeavor. Another problem with permethrin is that they, of course, before applying any sort of insecticide into the field, they have done rigorous risk analysis. So looking at what are the potential risks, not only for birds, but also for the ecosystem. And in the preliminary risk analysis, they found that there were no short-term effects for birds. And they have actually also seen that in the field. But the long-term effects of applying permethrin to bird nests was, first of all, unknown. And second, just in 2020, they conducted a study with zebra finches in an experimental setting where they look at applying permethrin into the base of the nest as a spray, and they look at the multi-generation kind of effects. And so what they found is that after applying very low concentrations of permethrin, they could see that in the second generation of zebra finches, the reproduction was lower, the reproduction rates was lower, some of the bird weight of the nestlings was lower as well. And so they found out that there was an effect of permethrin long term. And so given that, of course, is a concern for Galápagos, they looked at another chemical, another insecticide. It was suggested, this one, by the field biologists and the managers, and it's called Cyromazine. So looking here for different options to control Philornis downsi. So Cyromazine is an insect growth regulator. And if you remember the cycle I showed you for Philornis downsi, what this product does is that it stops the larval development. So here where you see the red cross, so the Cyromazine, what it does is that if you apply it, then the larva will not develop. And that's actually the goal here, because the larvae are the ones that are going to affect the chicks in the nest. And so Cyromazine is actually an insecticide that has been used in animal production, and it's used actually in poultry, and two ways. In poultry, it's been used directly applied to the feed. And so with chickens feed with Cyromazine applied to some of their food, And then the goal of this is to control the flies in the manure or in the chicken litter. Because it's actually an oral product for chickens, there has been experiments looking at the safety and the toxicity of this product to birds and poultry, and it's actually pretty safe. And that's why that was one of the reasons why it was suggested to be used in Galapagos. And so it's also been used not only in poultry, but also in livestock, like in sheep. So this picture here, what represents is what is called wetting. And so you apply the product directly on the sheep wool, and then it takes care of the stopping the development of the larvae. And finally, this product is also used in crops to control Diptera and Coleoptera. So, okay, so this is great. We have a product that is safe in poultry, it's been used in other animals, but it's not the same if we go to Galapagos and start putting this product on the bird nests, right? So of course, the National Park in Galapagos wanted to know more. And so what are the risks of Cyromazine, of application of this product to bird nests, not only to birds, but to the ecosystem? What happens if we do this, right? So that's where a team of us came in as a consultant for this question. And so this project was funded by Galapagos Conservancy and the Charles Darwin Foundation. And the group here that you can see the names. So it's a mix of expertise with risk assessment, epidemiology, and bird conservation. And so our task or our goal was to not only evaluate the risk of Cyromazine, which is a new product for Galapagos, and so evaluate the risk to birds and to the ecosystem, but also to compare the management strategy that they had before, so Permethrin as an insecticide, compare that with the new product. And the goal was to find which one was most effective at controlling the fly, while at the same time making sure that we minimize the toxicity to birds and to the ecosystem, and also that we had as much information of good quality information and data to back it up. So that's kind of what is written here. And at the same time, the other thing is that it had to be feasible, because as you saw, some of these nests are really high up and it gets very challenging. As you will hear me saying these words of risk and management and all of these criteria, you will not hear me say zero risk or things like that. There is no something like zero risk. It really doesn't happen. So I will talk about minimizing or maximizing, but I will not talk about eliminating completely. So our task was to evaluate these two chemicals, Permethrin and Cyromazine, and to evaluate 3 modes of application. So the way these chemicals can be applied are first, like as a nest injection, as I showed you earlier. So usually they use these large poles to get to the nest. And other times they actually climb the nest and inject it directly more manually. The other way is nest spray, so it's a very similar as injection. And the third one is called self-fumigation. And this is interesting because the self-fumigation, as you can see in the picture here, so what it consists of is that they put dispensers in the field, dispensers like throughout near the nest areas, with material that the birds might take back to the nest. So they might put, like here in the picture, cotton or feathers or any other material that birds might be interested in. And they impregnate this material with the chemical, with the hope that the bird will pick up that cotton or that feather and take it back to the nest when they are building their nest. And so they actually have observed, as you can see in the picture, birds doing this. And they have done it with Permethrin, but not quite yet with Cyromazine. And there is a lot of studies right now in Galapagos looking at different materials and across the different finches to see what materials they might be more interested in. And if so, impregnate the material with one of these chemicals. The other thing about this nest, as I said earlier, is that they are really tiny. So this picture is just to show you like the finger compared to the nest. And so this makes it very challenging when doing this type of applications. So combining the two chemicals and the three modes of application, what we did is that we evaluated 6 management strategies, which are depicted here. And throughout this process, one key feature is that we were continuously talking to the stakeholders and the people in the field so that we will get their feedback and also improve our approach. In building this approach and trying to evaluate these different management strategies, what we did is that we need to take into account 4 things, 4 criteria. The first one, it was to minimize, again, like the toxicity to birds, not only to the nestlings, but also to the adults. Second, we wanted to maximize the effectiveness against the fly. So we want to make it the best possible to eliminate the larvae. Third, we wanted to make it the most feasible option as possible, again, because of the challenges applying the product. And fourth, we want to make it the less uncertain possible. So ideally, we would like to have as much information to back up our decisions. And so again, like this was, even though I'm talking about the birds only for this presentation today, this is just to not forget that we didn't forget the rest of the ecosystem. And we did a preliminary risk analysis on the effects of Cyromazine to the ecosystem, to the aquatic species, to reptiles, to the mammals, to pretty much throughout everybody, the insects, to look at how risky it will be to apply Cyromazine. We didn't evaluate Permethrin here to the ecosystem because it had already been done. And so apart from the 6 strategies I showed you and the 4 criteria, then we call the stakeholders and the people that are really working on the field and ask them, okay, we have these 4 criteria and we have these 6 strategies, but now we need to know from you what is most important. Not the 4, like the 4 criteria maybe are not equally important. So tell us which one do you think is more important? And so this is what is representing here. We can create actually different scenarios to evaluate how will be the best strategy to manage this problem by changing our decisions. So here, for instance, the stakeholders told us that they wanted to weigh very heavily the toxicity to birds. So that means that the most important thing for them was to minimize that the birds will be exposed to the chemical. The other 3 criteria that I told you earlier, they are on the other side of the balance. They are less important for this scenario. But then we can also evaluate a possibility where we still weigh heavily on the side of the toxicity to birds, but we add also some importance to the effectiveness against the fly of the chemical. And we leave on the other side of the balance these other 2 criteria that we are not so interested for this one. And again, we can create another scenario where we weigh more heavily the side of feasibility and how feasible it is to apply the chemical, but we still keep in mind that it's very important not to get the toxicity to the birds. And so as you see, we kind of mix the strategies with the criteria and the information that the stakeholders want to see or that they value more. And so when we do all of that and we put it together, we can come up with different solutions. So we, as the team that evaluated the different strategies, we are not giving like the managers or the field biologists a specific one solution. We are giving them a breadth of potential decisions or potential solutions based on how they value different things and how we have evaluated all the evidence that is available. So of course, behind the scenes, there is a lot of work looking for the best data, evaluating the uncertainty of the data and talking to different experts. But just to, I wouldn't dare to bore you with all of that. So I'm just gonna give you like the gist of what happened with these decisions. So if you go back to a scenario A, where we weigh heavily, we really care about not making this process toxic for birds. The best option across those 6 options that we had originally was to use Cyromazine injectable. So that's the best option if we really want to minimize toxicity to birds. it's more controlled. Cyromazine is really like the toxicity is super low for birds as far as we could tell from the evidence. And so this option will be the best if we want to go that route. But if we want to kind of weigh also on the effectiveness, like increase the weight on the effectiveness of controlling the fly, then the best option for this one will be to spray with Cyromazine. So even though it's very similar, there are some like behind the scenes work that makes it different. And third, if we really want to look at feasibility and still like really caring about the toxicity, then the best way to go is to do self-fumigation, at least to try that approach. However, even though this sounds appealing because then you like with self-fumigation, you avoid the human resources and it's the birds doing the work. The problem with this approach is that the uncertainty is really high. And why is that? So this approach specifically, Cyromazine with self-fumigation has not been tested yet. And so that's why we don't have really any data to really say what might be the toxicity this route, what might be the effectiveness against the fly. And so there are a lot of unknowns here. However, we think that is potentially a really good option that needs to be tested. The other thing is that throughout this process, well, actually one thing about self-fumigation is that they have tried with Permethrin, as I think I mentioned earlier. And with Permethrin, this method was really effective. And actually the birds took the material, impregnated with insecticide. And after like I studied for a while, they discovered that the birds did really well with that method, so that the fly larvae numbers decreased, the birds survived really well. So anyway, throughout this process, two things that are really important to note is that these are really tough decisions. So yeah, looking back, like we presented different options to the managers. Still, the decisions is theirs, and the thing is like we made, or like they make decisions, but we made the process in a transparent way through a rigorous and scientifically based process. The other part of this is that, again, like there are still a lot of unknowns. And as I said earlier, in wildlife conservation, this goes usually very slow because there is not a lot of funding waiting for researchers to apply and to like go in the lab and test hypotheses. So uncertainty is big. But at the same time, it's also important that through this process, you identify what you don't know. So it's not only what you know or what you could have found information-wise, but also you discover what you don't know, which is important. And acknowledging that is really important in these processes. So if you're interested in the science, like hardcore science of this process, we published this work this last summer. And I'm happy to share the paper with whoever is interested to read about the nitty-gritty of the method and so on, and a bit in depth about the story. But just back to the beginning. So as you saw, like this problem of Philornis downsi is huge. In Galápagos, a lot of birds are, their population is decreasing, and there needs to be something done soon. And actually, I mean, they are doing this. They are actually working on all of these management strategies I showed you. But this process that I showed you, that scientific process, I wanted to highlight a few things. So it's a transparent process, even though I just showed you like really the highlights of it. But I'm also happy to share like the whole documents where we went through all the literature and everything to find out the answers. It's a very rigorous process, evidence-based, and it's very important in these kind of conservation problems to not do it in a silo and not just as the scientists come in and like do the thing. We need to involve the stakeholders. They are the ones that are going to be doing the management, and also the politicians that are going to be providing the money and the framework and the structure for this to happen. So as I said just now, like it's very important to identify the knowledge gaps so that we can improve this process in the future. And the beauty of this kind of approaches of risk analysis and decision making is that even though we don't have all the information, we have the framework laid out, and as soon as more data comes in, we can input that into our framework, and that kind of iteration, as I said here, improves the decision making, and so with more precision. And so, as I asked you also back to the beginning, even though we were in Galapagos, this process can be applied to any problem in the Twin Cities, with bird conservation, with other wildlife conservation, or anywhere. So that's a take-home message I want you to think about, how we can apply this type of approaches to any conservation problem we face using these features. And the other important thing is that when we are working in conservation and decision-making for conservation, we cannot just work in a silo, and I don't mean as a scientist right now, but we need to take into account that we live in a world where there are humans, where there are domestic animals, and we need all of these components to move forward. And so we need to look at conservation also taking into account all of these other aspects that make it really complex, but are also part of the puzzle. And so I think with that, I will leave it there. And I give you here my contact information in case you want to reach out and talk more about this or any other thing. And I think we will have time now for questions.
Great, thank you so much. So if anyone has questions, instead of using the chat function, please put your questions into the Q&A box here. And I will go ahead and read those off for Irene, and then you can answer them live.
Sounds good.
Did have a comment from our chapter chair reading, superb presentation, Irene, well organized, down to earth, graphic, and inspiring. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for that comment. Yeah, I mean, I hope it's a very complex process. I hope I didn't make it more confusing.
All right, well, let's give a few moments for people to enter in questions to kind of formulate them. It's a very relevant topic, and I especially appreciate the thoughtful and reflective questions around how that approach and that model can be applied to where we live, no matter if it's here within the Twin Cities, in Minnesota, or in other places around the world.
Correct.
So one of our guests did enter a question. It reads, so which of these options is currently being used? Are the treatments being readily accepted?
Great, thank you for the question. So in terms of the long-term solutions I put there, those are being tested in the lab and in the field right now, like small experiments. But what they have used for a while now, I would say for like 3 or 4 years, have been permethrin. And so the first chemical I show you, that one has been used in a few islands already, and some nests with success. So that's the one that they started using, and not only in Galapagos. Actually, this product has been used in other conservation programs around the world to fight other invasive species, other invasive insects successfully. The reason to go beyond the Cyromazine, beyond this Permethrin product, was the reason that they found that there are potential long-term effects for birds, but they have started using also Cyromazine, so the second chemical, in the field in Galapagos in small settings. And also it's very promising, the use of it in the application. What I have to say is that Cyromazine, like the second chemical, has not been used in other places around the world in conservation programs. And so the Galapagos is kind of like the first place where they are using it. And so I hope that answered the question. And the same in terms of accepting the approach, like the same field biologists and conservationists are very, they are kind of in a way desperate to find a solution to fight this fly. And when you balance not applying this product against applying them and being successful, the outcome for the birds is better if you apply the insecticide.
Thank you. Another question from another guest is reading, was some consideration given to biocontrol?
Yes, so right. So I just mentioned that very briefly. So there are a couple of things. They are trying to study biological control, and what they are studying is a wasp, which I forgot the name right now. It's a parasitoid that affects the fly, the invasive species. So the fly that affects the birds has a wasp that actually affect them. And so they are studying the use of that wasp as a potential weapon against the fly. But also in terms of, so that's biological control. In terms of biochemical control, they are also researching a tree that is called Guayabillo, at least in Spanish, I don't know the name in English. It's a tree endemic to Galapagos, and they are looking at that tree because it has insecticide properties, and it's still in the kind of early stages of studying, I believe, but they are testing it too.
Thank you. Let's see, I don't see any other questions. Irene, thank you so much for sharing the program. I do think in closing, what I'd like to do is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get our website up there. It'll take me just a moment.
Oh, and while you're doing that, Kitty, I see a question in the chat actually.
Oh, you do? Okay. Go ahead.
So so I'm not sure somebody who can access the Q&A, so and that's fine. So the question is, I've read that recent research by people like Peter and Rosemary Grant suggests that evolution can happen much faster than originally thought. What possibility is there that the finches will evolve to defeat the danger from the fly, the way some species seem to be evolving defenses against parasitism from brown-headed cowbirds? Yeah, thank you for that question. So in fact, not so long ago, there was a paper that came out just about this very issue. And I think there is still like doing some research on this topic, but they have observed that a couple of, so interestingly, what I read is that a couple of, so one species of finch, of the 17 or so finches that there are, started breeding with another species of finch, of another of those 17, and they are making like a hybrid finch. And this hybrid finch has been much more like resistant to the infestation from the fly. And so they think, and they are like publishing this now and testing the theory, is that same thing that you're saying with your comment, that evolution is happening in that sense, and that finches are finding this way to like escape from the fly this way. Apparently there is more strength this way. But at the same time, talking about evolution, is that the fly itself is also making progress, unfortunately. And so they are like laying eggs earlier and increasing their infestation density. And so, both ways there is evolution happening in the birds and also in the fly. But yeah, thank you for all the questions.
Great, thank you. So on the screen, you should be able to see the web address for our Audubon Chapter of Minneapolis. If you go to this website, you should be able to navigate pretty easily and find the contact information for our outreach and education. And so it should have my chapter email and then also Irene's. So like I said, we would love to have some extra people join us for our outreach and education team planning meetings. We're going to be getting some activities, outdoor activities out on the calendar, and would love to have you join us and be a part of those over these next couple of months here. Winter is moving in, but we're still very excited about getting outside and enjoying the birds and having some habitat service activities that benefit the birds and the environment. I think that is all, unless there are any final questions, and thank you all for joining us this evening.
Yeah, thank you for joining us and listening. And thank you, Katie.
Of course. All right, good night, everyone.